Hello and welcome to episode 14 of the One of the Many video cast with Rob Guzman. How are you doing today? I'm doing pretty well. So it's been a long time since I've done a video, been a few weeks. Just to give you a little personal update, one reason for that is I've been pretty busy, around the house. Also, I got promoted at work recently, which is really great, but that comes with a lot more responsibilities. So, I've had less time to do sort of extracurricular things like this. But I still like doing it, and I'm here again now to report on a whole bunch of stuff. So this is going to be a packed episode, lot to do. Another thing I'm going to be doing, and look up on Twitter or Facebook or wherever you receive this, wherever you consume this content, keep an eye out because I will be looking to start creating an official podcast out of this. I'll probably rip the audio from YouTube, put it up on SoundCloud and iTunes, and create an actual podcast proper so people can listen to this rather than have to watch a YouTube video. I realize YouTube isn't the most convenient medium for people who are like on the train or the bus or listening in their car or even walking down the street because you have to keep the app open. But, you don't really need a picture unless you want to see my handsome mug, But, generally you can listen to the content and get everything you need. So we'll see if I can get that done soon. Anyway, like I said, I got a packed show for you today, a lot to talk about. We have an emphasis on the many today. There's a lot of things that have happened since the last time I've done a video that I want to recap. And I want to do a good old-fashioned integration in this episode. I really want to stress that this show is all about not just giving you a whole deluge of concretes and items to think about, like headlines, but it's also about integrating them all into a common structure, a common framework, and pulling out what is important, what are the crucial principles, how to think about this, and where is the society moving? Where's the philosophy bringing us? So that's the point of the show, and that's what I'm going to be doing for you today. So let's begin. So a lot to talk about. I'm going to start with a topic I've already covered on the show, but it's gotten a lot more press in the last few weeks, last month, and that is the so-called Green New Deal that is championed by the likes of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, affectionately called AOC these days in media. She has her own acronym now, so it's convenient for people like me who don't want to spend all that time and effort. I mean, she already wastes enough of my time. I don't want to have to say her name, too, in full. So AOC is nice. They put out this 13-page document documenting the details of their Green New Deal. And there's some controversy around this, so let me just explain what was in the document that was online. It was on her website, put up by one of her office aides, and then it kind of got pulled down, reportedly because people were making fun of it, ridiculing it on Twitter, and on social media generally. What were some of the things in that document? Well, for one thing, it talked about phasing out fossil fuels in the next 10 years. Completely. Like they want to go to zero carbon emissions in the economy in 10 years. Now, just so you know, the economy's energy supply, 17% of that today is renewable energy. So you're talking about an 83% reduction in carbon dioxide emissions, and replacing it with what they call renewables, but what I call unreliables, things like solar and wind. Now, why are they unreliables? Because solar only works if the sun is shining, and wind only works if the wind is blowing. Otherwise, when those two things aren't happening, what happens is these so-called renewable energy power plants and power systems actually have to default to fossil fuels and nuclear power, which we'll get to in a second, to maintain the lifeblood of a society, the lifeblood of an economy, which is its energy supply. So the idea that you're going to have 100% renewables is practically impossible, but it's also a moral travesty because you're talking about basically gutting an entire industry. The fossil fuel, natural gas, coal, all these industries that have built all these plants, and they've innovated and given us energy, the thing that we need. Every industry needs energy, whether that's telecommunications, entertainment, transportation, getting to work on time, medicine, the manufacture of things like penicillin, having lights on in the hospital so you can actually treat people and have electricity to run your EKGs and MRI machines. I mean, energy is important in every industry, and the more expensive it becomes, the more unreliable it becomes, that affects every other industry. So we're talking about basically junking the entire fossil fuel industry, which has done a lot of good, despite the fanatical claims of global warming and climate change, which I've also covered previously in the show, and why I think it's not an issue, and why really it's an overblown fear. I mean, I don't want to get into global warming and climate change in this episode. I don't want to dominate it, but I just, basically, you can watch my episode on that. I think it was either 12 or 11. One of the earlier episodes I did documented climate change. and why I think it's a red herring, why it's not a big deal. So, get rid of all the carbon dioxide emissions. Sounds great, right? Ending air travel domestically. I mean, this is a big one. She wants to basically get rid of or ground many of the flights and replace it with high-speed rail around the country, okay? So trains or planes. Automobiles, we don't know. Probably get rid of those too. And here's an interesting one. In the document, it talked about retrofitting buildings. So basically, there are many hundreds of thousands of buildings in the United States. They want to retrofit them all. Basically make it so that it's illegal to have one of the older buildings around without having it retrofitted, so that it basically is more energy efficient. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in construction work, time spent to do this. All of it mandated by the government, forced by the government. And finally, and this is the most controversial piece in a lot of ways, but also the most honest, she claimed that she wanted to subsidize people that are unable to work and unwilling to work. So what does that mean exactly? Well, it means if people can't work, then they should be subsidized by people who can and are willing to. But if you also have people who are unwilling to work, what does that mean exactly? It means that somebody's need creates a claim on somebody else's life, that they can now basically parasitize and cannibalize people who do work and produce. Why? Because either they need it in the real sense that they're disabled or whatever, or if they need it spiritually or psychologically, they're just unwilling to work. This is a complete expression of the moral code of altruism, which I rail against in this program all the time. But it's here in spades. And, one of the things about this Green New Deal is what I like about it. And this is, again, one of the things I don't like AOC, but one of the things that I appreciate about her is that she's honest and she explains her premises explicitly. She's not hiding the fact that this is about government control. It's about socialism and about what she calls economic justice or climate justice, which really is the same thing. It's socialism. And what they want to do is, for many years, the Green movement has tried to hide this. They've tried to say, well, it's not about socialism. Yeah, we want government to take over these industries and impose all these requirements. But at the end of the day, it's really about the planet. It's about other people and the have-nots. It's not about socialism. It's not about government control. But she comes right out and says it. In one of her interviews, she said, people are saying, the interviewer told her and asked her, people are saying this is a government takeover and there's going to be a massive government intervention in the economy. And she said, yeah, that's right, it is. And I have no problem saying that, she said. So again, she says her premises explicitly. She plays her cards on the table, just like I do, which is a rarity today. Most people today are pragmatists. They try to hide behind what is feasible, or they try to hide behind technicalities. Things like they're all mixed economy, kind of pragmatic nothings when it comes to ideology, morality, and basically having an integrated perspective. They don't have any of it. They kind of coast. And whenever there's a strong, morally certain person who sets the standard for the society's moral code, they kind of follow along blithely without actually putting any effort or thought into it. So she's different in that sense. She's a crusader, like me. So I appreciate that. Although she's a crusader for the other side. So I don't like that. But the reason I said there's some controversy around this is she claimed that there was this botched rollout, that it was a mistake, that the document that was on the website was taken down because it wasn't the real thing, and that the document that was submitted to the House as an actual resolution was the true version, and what was on the site was just an FAQ, right? And it was kind of wide-ranging. She called it a first draft. I mean, this is really dishonest, because the fact is that the essence of that document is the same as the essence of the document in the House. Let me give you an example, a concrete example. So in the FAQ page, it said, quote, the United States should guarantee economic security for all who are unable to work or unwilling to work. Okay, that was on the FAQ page. Okay, end quote. That was on the FAQ page. Okay, and she says that's not right, that's not right. But what does the actual resolution say? It says that we need to create economic security for, quote, all Americans, unquote. Well, logically, that would include those who are not willing and able to work, now wouldn't it? Because that includes all Americans, right? All Americans means not just the people who are able to work and willing to work, not just the people who are able to work and choose not to, and it also includes the people who are unable and unwilling. It includes all of them. So logically, you can't say that you're for all of these people getting economic security and exclude this component. So it's dishonest. It's really bad. I mean, I think in one way it's positive that she had to pull it down because she was getting so much ridicule. But I'm going to come back to that point in a second, because the ridicule she's getting isn't the kind that needs to be launched against this ideology to stop it. And I'm going to get to that a little later in the program. But big points on this. I mean, that's really, I covered this before, that, the other point I want to make about this whole Green New Deal thing is that, Cory Booker, for example, is saying this is like fighting the Nazis or landing on the moon. It's not like those things. For one thing, landing on the moon, that represents man's triumph over nature. It represents man's building equipment, scientific equipment, and mastering the cosmos, basically mastering the physics, the laws of physics, in order to achieve escape velocity and get out of the Earth's orbit and then land on the moon. That represents an achievement of man's mind, of man's reason. What this is nothing like that. This is trying to take a step back. It's trying to say that man's reason should not change the planet. The planet is an absolute. It needs to remain inviolable and sacrosanct, and people be damned. People are a parasite. They are a problem. They need to be put down, basically, if you take this idea seriously. So it's not like the moon landing, and it's not like fighting Nazis either. Why is it not like fighting Nazis? Because Nazis represented an ideological threat to Americans. They were basically socialists, even though the left doesn't like to claim that. They were, in fact, a variety, a flavor of socialism. Fascism is a flavor of socialism. This is a topic I've covered at length in this program in the past. And this was an attack on us by a conscious ideological opponent. Even if you take the idea of climate change as a real problem, which I do not, but if you did, it is not the same thing as a conscious being or conscious group of beings coming at you and trying to destroy you with intent, with purpose. This is basically the idea that the earth is not safe for man without his intervention. Like, you can't just go out into the wilderness and expect to survive without tools, equipment, your reason, basically, doing things to the environment around you to make it better, to clean the drinking water, to remove predators, to build a shelter, to create and spin fabric. This all requires the conscious application of your mind to nature. You are changing nature to survive. But nature otherwise doesn't really have a consciousness. There's no conscious entity there trying to take you out. It just does what it does. It functions according to its nature, and all of its components do that. And here we are, trying to survive there. And it gives us laws in order. There's a great quote by Francis Bacon on this point, and that is, nature to be commanded must be obeyed. What that means is that in order to understand, in order to master nature, in order to survive within nature, you have to obey the laws of nature. You have to understand that, this element burns at this temperature and evaporates at this temperature. You have to understand that this is poison, this is food. You have to understand that this substance is good for building a home, this substance is good for paving a road, and so on and so forth. Those set the parameters, but your reason has to execute it and put it into action. So, again, really facile comparison here by Booker, just terrible. Just rhetoric, empty rhetoric with no real reference. So really, that's all I have on on AOC's New Deal, Green New Deal. I guess I should add that all the Democrats are basically stepping over each other to promote this, even though there are a couple of holdovers, and we'll get to that as this next topic actually, and that is Howard Schultz. Now, Howard Schultz is, for those of you who don't know, the CEO of Starbucks, or the former CEO of Starbucks, one of the founders of Starbucks. He's a billionaire, and he is planning on running as an independent candidate for president. He wants to challenge President Trump and also doesn't want to run as a Democrat. Now, why? What's interesting about Howard Schultz is that he is, in fact, a billionaire himself who's produced great wealth and actually done great things by building Starbucks into an international chain. But on top of that, he is an anti-socialist in his rhetoric. He actually believes that he earned his money. He believes that it's the American dream to become rich, and that you shouldn't hate people for their achievements. And he even comes out and says that the Democrats have gone too far left. He actually rejects the Green New Deal. He will say, for example, that he's with them ideologically, but that it's impractical and that it can't work. Now, what do I think about a guy like this? He's a mixed bag in a lot of ways. I respect his achievements in business. I respect that he has a semblance of a better philosophy, which is the idea of American individualism and the idea that the American dream consists in actualizing your potential, making something of your life, and that it's on you to do that, not others. You're not conditioned by your environment. It's not rigged against you. It's all about, do you have the gumption and the will to implement what you need to succeed. And I think that Howard Schultz is a great example of that. Now, where I disagree with him and where I think he goes wrong is the same place that the Republicans go wrong, and that is he doesn't attack the moral premises that lead to socialism, the Green New Deal, all of it. He basically endorses all of those premises, but doesn't want to swallow the final conclusions that they lead to. So you see this also with Republicans, and this is actually probably a good time to start talking about that a little bit, is the Republican reaction to this Green New Deal has been terrible in my mind. Why is it terrible? Well, it's humorous to make fun of AOC and the Democrats by saying, well, do you really want to get rid of, one of the proposals was to prevent cows from farting, like regulating cow farts, because cows produce methane when they fart. That's a greenhouse gas. So they say, okay, if we wipe out the majority of the cow population, which means, eating less meat and demolishing the cattle industry entirely, another industry they want to destroy. By regulating the number of cows, you can cut down the number of greenhouse gases, and so therefore we should get rid of cows, and that's one of the planks they mentioned in the Green New Deal. The Republicans ridicule that. They say, "Oh, look at this person talking about cow farts." And how do you take a train from Missouri to Europe? And you really want to get rid of air travel? I mean, I know air travel is annoying, but come on, this is air travel. You don't take flights. You don't fly around the country to give speeches and rallies, and there's that. They'll say like, "Oh, you want to rebuild every house in the country? What are you, crazy?" That means, they'll do the math. They'll say like, "Oh, it's 20 to 30,000 new houses built and reconstructed or changed every year, and or every week, every day, and you can't manage it. It just doesn't work. The numbers just don't add up, And that's all they've got. They don't have any kind of moral condemnation of this. They don't come out and attack the fundamentals. They don't say, AOC, we don't agree with your program even in principle. We don't even think it's a moral end. We think that humanity is the end. We should be basically allowing these industries to survive and flourish. We need to basically manipulate the earth to survive. And, that's the standard. Man's life is the standard. And altruism, forget that. They'll never challenge the altruism that's inherent in all this. But notice that's all they can really do is kind of like chip away at the details, and they can kind of ridicule her and mock her. And that's helpful in its own way, but it doesn't actually lead you to an alternative. It doesn't actually prevent this takeover by the Green New Dealers. All it does is basically make a mockery of them, so when a smarter person who's a little more educated, a little more knowledgeable, experienced than AOC comes along and takes what she had as a program and puts on it a more serious face. Like, oh, of course, we're not going to mention cows or planes, but we still want to destroy all the coal and oil industry. What's wrong with that? We still want to make it so it's 100% renewables. So you could still fly, but it won't matter because we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the things that everyone agrees is a reasonable thing to do, right? Reasonable thing to do. So they're not offering a viable alternative. They're not actually challenging them on their core premises, which is a problem. It's a huge problem. Now, there were two op-eds in the Wall Street Journal. Now, I recently subscribed to them. I don't know how long I will read them. One thing about them is that you can't really read their articles without a subscription. I mean, the Times gives you a certain number of articles per month, and then you have to pay or wait till the month is over. The same thing is true of Washington Post, and a few other papers do that. But Wall Street Journal is pretty much like, you can read some of their main page articles occasionally if it's a big breaking story without an account. But otherwise, like if it's an op-ed or if it's like an opinion piece or if it's like a public interest piece or something like that, it's not as like not as front and center, you'll have to pay for it. So I'll put links in, but if you don't have an account with them, don't bother paying for it. I think, it's probably not worth it just to read these two op-eds unless you see value in the paper overall. But there were two op-eds in the Wall Street Journal, which is generally a better paper on this issue, although not 100% good, as I'll explain. One of them is titled, "Who's Afraid of Socialism?" And that's written by the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal. And the other is that Republicans Need to Save Capitalism by Peggy Noonan. Now, Peggy Noonan was a Reagan consultant. She's a conservative woman, a little older, one of these older school Republicans, very prominent in the 80s and the 90s. And the gist of both op-eds basically cuts this way. It says that Trump and the Republicans are trying to revive the demonization of socialism. They're trying to paint the Democrats as socialists And that's the electoral strategy for Trump in 2020. And, Trump in his State of the Union even came out and said America will never be a socialist country. Now, I'll get to that in a second, why I think that's disingenuous of him and why I have a lot of criticism about Trump on this point. But, that seems to be the case. The Republicans are trying to make this about capitalism versus socialism. Now, I agree that is the issue. That's the clear, important, moral issue to discuss. Capitalism and socialism are political systems. They're social, political, economic systems. They encompass a whole way of organizing society. But they have, at their root, two opposite ethical ideologies. Socialism is supported by altruism, which is the idea that need comes first over rights, that rights are a secondary matter, and that if somebody has a need and you have something that can satisfy that need, you are morally obligated to help provide that for them, regardless of your interests. And in fact, altruism, if you push it to its logical conclusion, claims that any action you take under your self-interest is immoral only insofar as it serves others is it moral. And maybe that means you live a bare minimum in order to survive so you can keep producing. But the idea is that being wealthy under an altruist code is bad. It's evidence that you're not giving away enough, you're not sacrificing enough. Morality to an altruist is consistent with sacrifice. That's their core tenet. Capitalism, on the other hand, is backed up by egoism, which is the idea that every action you undertake, that you should be the beneficiary of that action. That as a living entity, as a human being, you basically have certain needs for your own survival, and that it's no shame or moral travesty for you to do the things that advance your life and make you happy. The purpose of your life isn't to sacrifice for others. It's to achieve your own happiness and to live your life to the fullest extent possible. Now, capitalism also argues that there are individual rights, which means there's certain things that you should do to promote your own life, but that you shouldn't do at the expense of others. So, capitalism is often strawmanned, and egoism as well is strawmanned by the left and by altruists of every variety, not just the left, as, well, you are an egoist if you are like Nietzsche or the sophists, and you go around victimizing people, stealing from them, taking from what they have and using it to enrich your own life, cutting other people's throats and stealing their money, robbing banks. This is what we view as egoism according to an altruist, but that's actually a caricature of egoism. You could think of it as a false alternative, right? The altruists and the what you could call the cynical egoists or the Nietzschean egoists basically split morality into two false alternative choices. Choice one is you sacrifice for others. That means your life isn't really worth much, but you get moral credit if you sacrifice for other people. Give to them, especially those who are more needy. The Nietzschean cynical egoist school says, no, you shouldn't sacrifice yourself to others. You should sacrifice others to yourself. That they should basically die or suffer because they're weaker than you. That might makes right. And that in fact, because you're stronger than them, because you have the means to take from them and make it yours, that you should do it. And that is what is ethically obligated, under this code. Now, my view, the objectivist view, is that this is a false alternative and that we are against sacrifice in principle. So you don't sacrifice yourself to others, you don't sacrifice others to yourself, you just don't do any kind of sacrificing. All you do is trade. So that means is you basically do things to enrich your life. By that I mean you produce. You use your mind, right, to pursue productive work, to satisfy the ends of others for a price, for an exchange. They give you something in return for what you provide them. It's a wonderful, glorious arrangement where both parties benefit, and you basically go as high as you can. That as high as you go is not a problem or a claim on anyone else, and no one has a claim on you if you go beyond a certain point. In other words, you are basically you should be able to retain 100%, up to infinity, as much wealth as you create and choose to keep. And you are not ethically obligated to serve others. Okay? Now, again, this is the core issue in ethics. And the issue of capitalism versus socialism is the political manifestation of this ethical dilemma or problem. But the problem with the Republicans is they don't understand what capitalism is or what socialism is. To a Republican, capitalism is, well, it's the invisible hand of Adam Smith. You know, that whole thing, Adam Smith's invisible hand. Basically, if you read Wealth of Nations, which is Adam Smith's book on economics, Adam Smith is often viewed as the founder of capitalism. Now, I would say ethically, if you look at the ethical system that underlies it, that goes back to Aristotle and other ancient Greek philosophers, and then it's basically transmitted over time to different thinkers. But if you look at it from a purely economic perspective, that's true. He was the first one to systematize economics as a field of study. And you could say, in that sense, he was definitely a capitalist. He advocated for trade over protectionism, and he was great on a lot of issues. But the problem with Adam Smith is the same problem with the Republicans today, and that is they believe that self-interest is inherently sinful or wrong or evil, and that the market, basically the invisible hand, is this sort of mystical property that transmutes immoral self-interest into moral public interest. In other words, Adam Smith acknowledged, when the baker makes the bread, he doesn't do it for your sake. He does it for his own sake. Now, Adam Smith would say that's immoral. That's not good that he does that. But if everybody does that, somehow, by this magical property of the market, that becomes now a moral act. It produces a better public gain. Now, that's actually, in fact, true that, capitalism produces the greatest good for the greatest number. It actually is the tide that lifts all boats. That's actually factually correct. But that's not the primary, that's not the justification for it. And that shouldn't be the bedrock principle that holds it up. What holds it up is the fact that you are an individual man or woman or whatever, whatever gender you want. We'll get into that another day. You are what you are, and your nature dictates that you must operate in your self-interest to survive, and there's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, other people are a use to you because they also can produce. They have values to offer you. You have values to offer them. And that it's actually in all your interest to trade voluntarily on your own terms without being forced, without being compelled, without being, coerced by the government. So ultimately, what this means is that the Republicans can't defend capitalism because what they're defending is not capitalism. It's this kind of what they call moral capitalism, sometimes called compassionate conservatism or compassionate capitalism, which really is just capitalism, but on a altruist moral base, which doesn't work because the two are incompatible. And as soon as it's the case that the public good isn't served, then capitalism goes out the window because that's the primary for them. It's the public good. Now, the issue with the term public good and the concept is that it's not a real valid concept. There's no referent for it. Public good means whatever the speaker wants it to mean. If I say the public good today is, black single mothers, that means we can now tax the rich and all the other people in society more to benefit them. Well, once the regime changes, and now you've got, say, maybe a Nazi regime or a nativist regime, all of a sudden, okay, maybe the Aryan race is the public good, so we'll do what's in their interest. Or it's the Native Americans who were killed. They're now the public good. So the problem with the public good, or it could be that, it's the 99% is the public good, and the 1% are not. So the problem with the whole idea of public good is that it's an inherently mystical idea. There's no referent behind it. It's basically whatever the speaker wants to justify at that moment in time. Whatever scapegoat they choose to exclude from the public good is made to pay for the so-called public good. So this is, again, you have to get your fundamentals right to defend the derivative stuff. Now, capitalism as a political system is derivative. It's not a primary. This is one of the things that's funny is that a lot of people on Facebook and a lot of these leftists love to go to politics immediately without any context, without any basis in ethics, without any basis in any of the earlier branches of philosophy. The truth is that politics comes later. It's a derivative branch, not a primary. Once you've accepted a certain metaphysics and epistemology, like once you understand the basic rules of reality and what reality consists of, then you say, okay, well, I have a certain ethical foundation that comes out of that. That leads you to a political situation. It's not the opposite. So politics is not a primary, so beware of people who try to make it a primary. So there's a lot there to untangle, but I'll just summarize really briefly that point. So I talked about Howard Schultz, and I talked about the Republicans and Trump basically trying to use the rhetoric of capitalism and anti-socialism, but not really accepting the moral premises that are required to fully endorse that. So there's that. So this next topic is related, and again, I'm going to combine it. There's two that I want to combine. So I called this in my notes. There's this topic of Amazon having their headquarters possibly move, their second headquarters possibly move to New York. That deal officially has basically fallen through, and they've decided to pull out of New York City as the endpoint for their headquarters. And the other one is what I'm calling here the war on wealth and the war on billionaires. So these two are related, and I'm going to explain why. So let's start with Amazon, because it's a little more concrete what's going on there. So Amazon was given a $3 billion tax break to build their headquarters in New York City. This was proposed by by Governor Cuomo. It was also proposed by de Blasio and the mayor of New York City, who's a Democrat and a Sandinista, basically a Marxist. And this got widespread opposition from people. I mean, I have Facebook friends, totally disminded people who basically reflexively were cheering about this. Oh, yes, victory, one person posted. And another person's like, finally, the little people win one. And, we stuck it to the man, or we stuck it to Jeff Bezos, the richest man on the planet. Or people like, wow, yeah, now my rent won't go up. And, all these kind of really short-sighted, ridiculous views on this issue. Now, I view this as an unmitigated tragedy and a really bad precedent. So, for one thing, let's talk about what happened. Basically, they offered them this tax break to build here. They said they were going to do it. People revolted, got mad. Cortez, AOC, of course, being the creature she is, basically doing this on Twitter, railing against Bezos and Amazon. Oh, they treat their workers badly, and they're going to destroy the diversity of the city. Well, we'll get to the arguments for why they don't like Amazon in a second. But basically, they got their way, and Amazon's pulled out. Now, why are they cheering? Why are people cheering this? Not all of them are cheering, first of all. Cuomo was upset about this, said it's AOC's fault that this is happening, and she was wrong to do it because it's going to cost jobs and it's going to cost tax revenue. De Blasio said a similar thing. In fact, de Blasio didn't go out and blame Cortez, but he did say it was a mistake for them to pull out, that he regrets they did it, and basically said that, he even said so far, he's so despicable, he says they couldn't take the heat, and that he even called it, quote, an arbitrary decision, unquote, by Amazon. Arbitrary. So the reason I bring this up, and the reason I put it in the context of the war on billionaires, is because the reasons given for why this was bad. Why was it bad for Amazon to build their headquarters in New York? Now, one kind of justification that I've read about says, well, they're going to ruin diversity. They're going to basically lead to more gentrification, which means these low-income neighborhoods won't be able to maintain where they are, and people with money, like programmers and business people, are going to keep people out of a home, or they're going to raise the price of living. Like people complaining about their rents going up because now you have a class of people coming in who are more likely to spend more for rent because they're making a pretty decent salary at Amazon. So that's one kind of justification. Now, what would I say to that? I would say, well, if you really want to complain about rent, and you really want to complain about low-income people having a place to live, your first target shouldn't be Amazon. It should be the government. It should be government passing rent control legislation, which actually favors the middle class over both lower-class people and upper-class people, just the way that it's structured. And also, it hurts landlords. It basically makes the entire investment of real estate in New York an iffy matter, because now you don't know what the city's going to do. Like, are they going to start raising rent control? Are they going to start imposing? Are they going to do a Green New Deal and say your building needs to be retrofitted all of a sudden? I mean, all the chaos around legislating rent control or maintaining government control over the rental market actually distorts that market and actually causes a lot of widespread pain. And we can go into that in a different video. I don't have a lot of time to talk about that right now, this second. But this is a basic economic point. You can read about this in any economic textbook about how rent control actually favors the middle class over both lower and upper class. Now, I don't view people in terms of class, and I think that it's not useful to do so. In fact, I am not for helping any class, so-called. I think the government should allow people to transact freely with each other, and they shouldn't get involved because the government is the organization with force, the ability to use a gun and impose their will by force without negotiation or negotiation, without reason. So at the end of the day, I think that this whole thing about, it's Amazon's fault because the rent will go up or the cost of living will go up, that's ridiculous. That's not the right target for that kind of outrage, if that's what you have. Now, the second reason they say is, well, we're subsidizing those jobs, right? Because that $3 billion tax cut, that's going to eat away at our revenues. The city has to pay for that. Well, the fact here is that a tax cut isn't the same thing as a subsidy, right? People don't quite get this point, but this is actually very important. A subsidy is a grant by the government or some entity with money, given to someone or some entity that hasn't produced it, right? If I am, if you ever read the Atlas Shrugged, one of these failing businesses, if there's a failing business like GM or one of the banks that were bailed out, if they're subsidized because money is given to them to prevent their failure and collapse. They haven't earned that money. The government is doing it and basically taking another person's money, the taxpayer, and giving it to them gratis for whatever they need them to do, okay? On the other hand, a tax cut is simply taking less away from something that someone else has already produced. So the idea of a tax is that you produce a certain amount of wealth, the government takes it from you by force, and then gives it to other people, spends it on social programs, whatever they want to do with it. A tax cut is not in the same category as a subsidy. They're different. Even though it's true that a person who receives a subsidy gets a certain amount of money. Say I give you a subsidy for X dollars, $1,000 say, you're $1,000 richer in that case. And if I pass a tax cut so you get to keep $1,000 more, you're still $1,000 richer. So the outcome is the same. But the outcome isn't the only thing that goes into whether a decision is moral or just or right. Think about this. Here's a really easy concretization for this point. Suppose you are a little old lady crossing the street, and you're about to get hit by a car, and I come running to save you, and I plunge into you, and I knock you to the pavement, but out of the way of the oncoming car. Now, you may twist an ankle or hurt your wrist, but you're alive and you survived because of my action. I'm a hero in that context, okay? Now, the other side is, what if instead of knocking you out of the way of the speeding car, you're in an alley in the middle of the night, and I knock you to the ground so I can steal your purse? Now, you may come away with the same kind of injury, but the fact is that we look at my performance in that situation and the action as a whole as two very different things. They are in morally different categories. In one, I'm a hero, and one, I'm a villain. And the same thing is true of the difference between a subsidy and a tax. You can't say that just because the outcome is the same, because both people get the same amount of money, that's therefore means they're the same kind of action. So that's the first point to say about this. But the other point is that you're not really subsidizing anything because Amazon's going to create wealth wherever it goes. It's going to create jobs. People are going to be able to now work there. Businesses will crop up to serve the office space and actually serve the people who come in every morning. People are going to have this commercial activity that is stimulated by Amazon's presence. And not just in New York, around the world. Amazon has done incredible good. I mean, if you think about it, Amazon began as a bookseller. That's what their original purpose was, believe it or not. And now they sell lots of things. I mean, I've seen people, hypocrites, people on Facebook, the same kind of people who are against Amazon, oh, not in our backyard, same kind of people, their house would be full of products from Amazon. Boxes that get mailed in, oh, I'm on Prime, yeah, so I get my overnight delivery. Here you are getting all the benefits of Amazon and criticizing them morally for being rich or for doing whatever it is that you don't want them to do. I mean, that's just pure hypocrisy. But, Amazon creates great wealth and has done wonderful things. I mean, it's made shopping easier. It's stimulated people to be able to shop at home, people who can't go to the grocery store or don't have a store in their area to sell the products they want. It helps them get around that. It helps people get groceries and other things shipped. So if you're like a little old lady and you can't lift a big crate of water into your home, now they can actually ship it to you and you can have it picked up right at your doorstep. I mean, this is good stuff for everybody, not just little old ladies. But the fact is, it's great wealth. Even in the programming sector where I work, Amazon is wonderful. They have a cloud service that's almost unparalleled. I mean, they have so much data analysis and so much storage. It's dirt cheap for what you're getting. And here are these people claiming that they don't produce wealth. Well, I'm sorry, they do produce wealth. You can evade it all day long, but that they do in fact produce wealth. And if your government is going to offer them a $3 billion tax cut to stimulate their economy, maybe if you're upset about that, the government shouldn't be taxing as much. Maybe that's the thing. Maybe instead of complaining about the fact that they're giving them a tax break, maybe you should not depend so much on taxes. and spend less. How about that? I mean, this never crosses these people's minds because, again, and finally, this leads to the third reason they criticize Amazon, and this is the most important. Amazon is successful. Amazon is wealthy. Jeff Bezos is rich. He's a billionaire. They're rich. They're egoistic. Therefore, they're evil. They are not altruist. They are not bleeding enough. They are not sacrificing enough for the common good. That is the real moral reason why the useful idiots on Facebook and other places, like in my office and other places. Again, anyone watching here, I mean, we'll talk if you think if you're one of these people, because I think that you are in this, at least in this instant, being a useful idiot. But I think that, it's hatred of the wealth that they've created. It's hatred of the prosperity they created. People will say, well, he could afford to pay his workers more because he's a billionaire and all this. Well, the fact is, even if he could afford to pay them more, what are they actually doing? What's the service they're providing? If their work is worth $20 an hour or $30 an hour and they're, in a situation where they could make a little more, sure, they could maybe make a little more. You could do a lot of things if you make people sort of interchangeable pawns and make their bank accounts your little piggy bank. You can do lots of, quote, good in the short term. But the fact is that you're destroying the society because now you're making it so people who earn money can't keep what they earn. You're basically putting people in a position where they produce something and they can't actually reap the benefit of what they're producing. So now you've got a situation where not only is wealth going to flee, which people do now, they flee to high-tax states and they're going to continue doing it, especially if New York passes more laws to take more of their money, they'll leave. But not only that, but few of them will come into existence. Why bother starting a company? Why bother taking a risk if you can't benefit and keep what you created? Okay? So that's the real essence here of the attack on Amazon. And, it's so ridiculous. Now, I want to continue this theme of war on billionaires. There are a couple other quick headlines here. Bill Gates, $73 billion net worth. Bill Gates, founder of Microsoft, one of the most successful entrepreneurs in history. Revolutionized the computing industry, made everyone's life better in every industry, nearly. Basically saying that he didn't deserve his wealth, and no one does. It's all luck, it's genes, whatever it is. And he basically is saying that, don't hate me, I'm giving away more and more to charity every day, and I'm not going to give any money to my kids. No self-interest here. I just want to give it all away to those who need it. Regardless of whether they earn it, regardless of whether or not he wants to do it, he made that wealth. But this idea that you didn't make your own wealth actually comes out of a philosopher at Harvard named John Rawls, the father of egalitarianism, who basically argued that because you don't create yourself, because you don't create your own traits, you are therefore incapable of earning anything, which is ridiculous because we see every day people actually take what they have and make the most of it, and there are people who take what they have and don't do squat with it. There is agency, there is the capacity to do more or less, and this idea that because you don't create your own existence, you're therefore not responsible for the things that you create and do or not create is ridiculous, and it's a moral travesty. But that's basically what we're down to. I mean, along the same lines, AOC has come out recently saying that, a system which produces billionaires is immoral, and, my view on this is that there's two last points I want to make about the war on billionaires before I get to the final conclusion and the sort of wrap up here of this whole episode, which has already gone on for a while, but bear with me, there's more good stuff coming here. Two more points. For one thing, AOC and others, there's a contradiction in their worldview on this issue. On the one hand, they say billionaires are immoral, we should have fewer of them, and they need to pay their fair share. And in fact, if someone's a billionaire, if our system has created a billionaire, then it's a moral failing, it's done something wrong, and that needs to be corrected, right? Now, on the other hand, if you ask her, how are you going to fund all your plans to create free college tuition for people and, revolutionize for the Green New Deal, basically reconstruct every building in America, give away money to support people who don't work. How do you plan on funding that? Where's that going to come from? Where's the revenue from that going to come from? And she'll say billionaires. This is a classic case of somebody hating the person that they need, hating the person that they depend upon. It's like the mosquito or the leech basically saying how horrible it is that their host is alive and exists at all. The fact is, nobody who advocates this can be truly happy because your whole existence is now dependent on someone you deem to be morally inferior to you. And so here we have the major contradiction of the left, which is that it's actually suicidal. It's suicidal to the point where they will advocate for all this legislation and crippling regulation to hurt the people that produce what they need. And you can see this, like AOC walking around with an iPhone and a latte, expensive designer clothes, living in a nice home. Where does she get all that? That didn't come out of nowhere. That came from capitalism. It came from people investing their time, their effort, their reason, their wealth into producing that for her. So she wants the effects of this, but without the cause. So that's point one, is that it's a complete contradiction. Now, the second point I want to make is that if you want to make life better, like if you're Bill Gates and you're concerned about people in Africa who have tetanus or malaria, or you're concerned about people starving in the third world, what can you do to help them? It's not buying a couple malaria nets. It's not funding the Peace Corps or giving Doctors Without Borders, i.e. Doctors Without Standards, money. It's not basically giving it all away and bleeding your life away and basically saying how evil I am. Take all my money, government, and do what you will with it. That's not how you make life better for people. What you do is you basically raise the standard of living for everybody by producing more technological wonders, by investing in lowering the cost of production, by basically revolutionizing the economy and producing wealth, prosperity. That's how you make people's lives better. The West wasn't won. The West wasn't, made into the economic powerhouse it is today because of altruism, because of giving away wealth and people losing everything because they want to sacrifice it to appease some do-nothing, or Cortez or Nancy Pelosi or any of these others. Instead, it was created by people who follow their self-interest and actually mastered nature, mastered reality to produce a value and trade it. And they accumulate great wealth to the extent that they do a better job than other people. So they are entitled to keep that wealth, and they should keep every dollar. So my verdict is we don't need fewer billionaires. We need more billionaires. And that's the fact. So if you want life to be better, stimulate the creation of more billionaires by not stimulating, by not gumming in with the government and trying to engineer everything. Okay? So the big pictures here. So what are some of the big pictures here? We talked about a lot today. We talked about Howard Schultz and the Republicans and their attempts to defend capitalism against the left. We talked about Amazon and their attempt to move into New York and having their plans stymied by anti-prosperity and anti-wealth leftists who basically say that they're going to be doing bad things. We talked about the war on billionaires and on wealth generally and said that we need a society that's equal. Billionaires are not equal. It's economic inequality, so that's got to go. And finally, there's the Green New Deal, which is we need to basically do the right thing, and that means destroy the economy as we know it, roll back the Industrial Revolution, and then basically we'll be agrarian, poor, but we'll be more equal and therefore more moral. So those four big things. Now, what's the common thread? There's a couple threads. Thread one, you can see, is there's an ethical thread here, that all of these people in one way or another advocate for altruism as a primary. Okay? They basically want to institutionalize altruism as the moral code, which it already is largely, and they can't even dream of an alternative, because to them, the alternative to altruism is sacrificing others to prop up your own life. But the fact is they've never even conceived of or been given an alternative, which means do what's best for you, reap the benefits, and trade with others. And it benefits everybody, benefits both parties. That ethical issue is the first big thing that unites all these stories. You can see that altruism is present in the whole Amazon fiasco, right? Because they're saying these billionaires, this big company, they already have enough money. We need to now give it to others. And if that means fewer jobs, less in commercial activity in New York, and ultimately even more tax revenue, so be it. That's the price we pay for more income equality, as they say. It's also present in the attack on billionaires. Billionaires are immoral. Why? Because they have more than others. They need to give. If they don't give, they're not moral. Hence, altruism. The third thing, the inability of the Republicans and Schultz to defend capitalism. Why? Altruism. Adam Smith. The idea that giving is a good thing, capitalism is a necessary evil rather than a necessary good. And finally, the last thing, the whole Green New Deal. Well, we need to roll back all this selfish production and selfish human exploitation, so-called, of the earth, And that means rolling back the standard of living for lots of individuals in order to appease a collective non-entity, which is the environment. So that's one common thread, is ethical. But there's actually even a deeper thread here that I want to finish this on. And that is, there's something in all these examples of the split in these people's minds between causes and effects. So let me justify that a little bit. So cause and effect means that if you want to reach a certain effect, if you want to implement some program or reach some result, you have to institute the necessary causes that lead to it. You can't expect to institutionalize something and ignore its effects, because that's anti-reality. And you can't expect to have the effects without the necessary causes that lead to it. That's also anti-reality. And all four of these examples are cases of anti-causality. It's basically the idea that there's a split between causes and effects. So let's go through them. Amazon. De Blasio, Cuomo, all these New York politicians, they want to have prosperity in New York. They want jobs, they want tax money, they want commercial activity. But they're trying to deny the thing that creates it, which is freedom, the ability for businesses to come and go, to negotiate prices for rent and for building occupancy, and then allowing them the freedom to operate unhindered by burdensome regulation and taxation. They want to have the effects without the causes. So anti-causality on that front. The same thing can be said, by the way, in their attacks on Lyft and Uber, and their attacks on and their attempts to put in the minimum wage. Again, anti-causality there as well. What about this whole Green New Deal? Well, Green New Deal says we want to have long life and prosperity and health for all the population, but we want to deny the thing that makes it possible, which is exploitation of nature, learning more about the environment, and actually manipulating it to serve our ends rather than basically amble along, like people without any basis for living, basically. So again, separation of cause and effect. How about the war on billionaires? Right, that's number 3. Attack there is that wealth is an effect, not a cause. This is something they don't realize. Wealth can't be plucked out of thin air. Subsidies and tax cuts are not the same. You can't say that just because the outcome is the same, they are in fact the same activity. What's actually happening is, one leads to more prosperity. Tax cuts and less spending leads to more businesses coming in and producing more, so that you get effects and benefits that extend beyond just what the government can provide. Right? Amazon prospering as a company means that you have more products being sold, more jobs being created, more local businesses thriving to serve that need of that company. And competitors are stimulated because they earn a profit, so now investors will try to beat them and actually take some of that profit for themselves. That leads to more innovation, more creativity, more good things for everybody. But again, the wealth, the money, the nugget that all these Democrats want to expropriate, that is an effect. It doesn't exist in nature. It's not something that just exists without human intervention. Wealth is created. It's a result. It's an effect, not a cause. And finally, what's the last thing? Republicans. Okay. Republicans and Schultz, again, they want their capitalism and they want to eat it too. They want to have, altruism and religion and Christianity, and they want to have a situation where the good people are those who sacrifice, bleed for others. And yet, they want the wealth and productivity and economic prosperity that egoism creates. So they want to have an effect without the necessary cause. And they want a cause and to avoid the effect while still putting that cause into action. So you can see that, again, all of these are very concrete proof of how philosophy controls life. It controls politics, it controls what people do and why they do it. And ultimately, what we're seeing here is not just an attack on ethical grounds where they want to push altruism. That's true, but ultimately, the deeper connection is you even have a failure to understand cause and effect, to be against it, to in fact not only be against cause and effect, but to rebel against it to the point where you want effects without causes, you want causes without any of the effects, and, to all those who disagree, damn them. Who cares? Their opinions don't matter, it's just opinions, right? There are no facts, everyone has a lived experience, as they say, and there's no right answer, there's no causality. The goods are here, so let's just now distribute it. Like, John Kenneth Galbraith, one of these socialist economists, once said, the problem of production has been solved, and now all that remains is the problem of distribution, as though that's two separate things, as though distribution requires production. And in fact, if you have no production, you have nothing to distribute. And if you now have a policy of distribution to needs without ends, without people earning it, you have no production. It goes away. Okay? So I'm getting a little animated here. I've also been talking for a while, and I've, long time. But we'll wrap up here. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I hope you got a lot out of this program. I hope you learn how to sort of think in principle a little bit every time you watch this program or listen to it, hopefully, when I get the podcast all set up and running. And have a good rest of your week. And be on the lookout for more content from me on the One of the Many podcast. But I'll be starting to spin up another thing, which I may or may not... I'll try one pilot and see how it's received, but I'm thinking about doing sort of an article review series, so more on that coming soon. And I think I'm going to do as my first article the topic of consciousness, which is a very interesting topic for those of you who want to know more. Follow me on YouTube, follow me on Twitter, do whatever you can to keep in touch, and I'll see you next time. Bye.